There is a specific kind of loneliness that is very difficult to explain to anyone who has not felt it. It is not the loneliness of being alone. It is the loneliness of being beside someone, of sitting across from them at breakfast, of sleeping in the same bed, of sharing a life in every external measure and still feeling completely, quietly, unreachably alone. I want to tell you about a woman named Diane. Diane was married for 19 years to a man named Robert. Robert was not a bad man. That is the first thing she wants you to understand. He was not unkind. He was not unfaithful. He was not neglectful in the ways that people usually mean when they use that word. He came home every evening. He remembered her birthday. He sat with her at dinner and asked about her day and listened to the answer, or something that looked very much like listening. And yet Diane spent most of those 19 years feeling, in some place she could not quite name or explain, profoundly alone. My name is Patricia Hayes. Welcome to Patricia's Porch. What I want to talk about today is emotional unavailability. Not the dramatic kind that shows up in obvious ways, the partner who is cold or dismissive or cruel or visibly checked out. That kind is easier to name. What I want to talk about is the quieter kind, the kind that hides behind a good man, behind a kind face and a calm demeanor and a life that looks from the outside entirely fine. Because the hardest thing about loving someone who is emotionally unavailable in this quieter, more hidden way is that there is almost nothing you can point to. There is no incident. There is no pattern of cruelty or neglect that you can name clearly to someone else and have them understand. What there is, instead, is a persistent and exhausting sense of reaching, of extending your hand towards someone who is physically standing right in front of you and finding every time that they are somehow not quite there. This is the man who is there but never really there. And I want to tell you what that costs the woman who loves him. The first cost is that she loses the language for what she is experiencing. This is important to understand because the loss of language is the loss of something very fundamental. When you cannot name what is happening to you, you cannot address it. You cannot seek help for it. You cannot explain it to anyone else. And crucially, you cannot even fully believe it yourself. Diane told me that for years, she did not have a word for what she was feeling. She only knew that something was missing, not something dramatic, something quiet, something she would notice in small moments when she wanted to share something that mattered to her. And Robert would listen and respond appropriately, and then the conversation would move on, and she would be left with the peculiar sensation that nothing had actually been exchanged, that he had heard the words and not the thing behind the words. She tried to explain this to him once. She said, "Sometimes when I talk to you, I feel like you're not really here." And he looked at her, genuinely puzzled, and said, "I'm sitting right here. I'm listening to everything you say." And he was. That was the problem. He was listening. He was physically present. He was doing everything right by every visible measure. And somehow still she was alone. She began to wonder if she was the problem, if she was asking for something unreasonable, if she was simply too much, too needy, too emotional, too difficult to satisfy. She carried this question for years, and the question itself became its own kind of prison. The second cost is that she begins to shrink the parts of herself that he cannot reach. This happens gradually. It is not a decision she makes consciously. It is more like a slow, quiet editing, a process by which she learns through small, repeated experiences which parts of herself are welcomed, and which parts are received with that polite, slightly puzzled blankness that means, I don't know what to do with this. She stops bringing him the things that matter most to her, not because she has decided to stop, because she has learned over time that bringing those things to him produces a specific kind of disappointment, not a rejection exactly, but an absence of recognition. And that absence hurts more than not sharing at all. So she finds other places for those parts of herself. A friend who understands, a journal she keeps, a corner of her inner life that she tends alone and does not attempt to share with him anymore. And here is the subtle tragedy. From the outside, this looks like peace. It looks like she has found her equilibrium. It looks like things are fine. And he, seeing that she has stopped bringing him problems, genuinely believes they are. She is not fine. She is managing. There is a profound difference between those two things, and most people cannot see it from the outside. The third cost is what the reaching does to her sense of herself. There is a particular effect that years of reaching and not quite connecting has on a person. It is not anger, exactly. It is not resentment, though there is some of that. It is more like a slow erosion of confidence in your own perceptions, a creeping uncertainty about whether you are, in fact, as difficult as you must be if this man who loves you still cannot quite reach you. Diane told me that by the 15th year of her marriage, she had largely stopped trusting her own emotional reality. If she felt lonely, she would check herself. Was she being unreasonable? Was she expecting too much? If she felt disconnected, she would review the evidence. He had done nothing wrong. He had been kind. What more was she asking for? She had spent so many years being told not in words, but in the quiet daily language of not quite being met, that her emotional needs were excessive, that she had begun to believe it. This is one of the most damaging things that emotional unavailability does. It does not wound you openly. It wounds you by teaching you to wound yourself, to take your own needs and quietly, systematically dismantle them from the inside. The fourth cost is that she cannot explain it to anyone. This is perhaps the most isolating part of the experience. If Diane had been in a relationship with a man who was obviously unkind, who was cold, dismissive, or cruel, she would have had language for it. She would have had a story she could tell. The people who loved her would have been able to offer sympathy that landed in the right place. But what Diane had was a man who was kind, who was gentle, who tried in the ways he knew how to try. And when she spoke about her loneliness, when she tried to explain what was missing, the response was almost always some version of, "But he sounds like a good man. He sounds like he loves you." And he did love her. She never doubted that. The love was real. But love, she had come to understand, is not the same as connection. Love is not the same as being truly known by the person you are beside. A man can love you with everything he has and still be unable to reach you in the specific way that you need to be reached. Not because he doesn't care, because reaching in that particular way is something he simply does not have access to. That distinction is very hard to explain. And when you cannot explain it, you carry it alone. The fifth cost, and this is the one I most want you to sit with, is the slow forgetting of who she was before she started making herself smaller. There comes a point in some of these relationships where a woman has edited herself so thoroughly and carried her loneliness so privately for so long that she can no longer clearly remember what she was like before all of this began, who she was when she still brought the full weight of herself into a room, what she wanted before she learned to want less. Diane told me she found a journal she had kept in her 20s before Robert, before the marriage, and she read it and she wept. Not because it was sad, because it was so vivid, because the woman on those pages was alive in a way that she had not been for a very long time, full of opinions and desires and a kind of unself-conscious certainty about what she felt and what she needed. She barely recognized her. The recovering of that woman, the slow, patient work of remembering who she was and what she wanted, is what she has spent the years since her separation doing. And she told me it is the hardest thing she has ever done. Harder than the separation itself. Harder than the practical reconstruction of her life. Because it requires her to grieve not only the marriage, but the years she spent inside it, quietly becoming less. I want to say two things before I close. The first is for the women who are recognizing themselves in what I have described. If something in Diane's story sounds familiar, if you have spent time reaching for someone who is physically present and somehow always slightly out of reach, I am not telling you to leave. I am not telling you to stay. That is not my place. What I am telling you is this. What you are experiencing is real. The loneliness of being beside someone who cannot meet you where you are, that is a genuine loss. You are not imagining it. You are not being too much. You are describing something real that has a name and a shape, even if the name has been hard to find. The second thing is this. Emotional unavailability in both its obvious and its quieter forms is not always permanent. Some people, when it is named clearly and honestly between two people who both want to understand it, can do the work of learning to reach differently. I have seen it happen. It is possible, but it requires the other person to believe the problem is real. And that belief, that quiet, genuine willingness to say, yes, I hear you. I understand that something is missing, and I want to understand it too, is the beginning of everything. Without it, nothing changes. And a woman can only reach for so long before her arms grow tired. My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch. I make a new episode here every week because I believe that the conversations we are not having in our daily lives are the ones that matter most. If something I said today found you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. There is a subscribe button below. I would love to keep being a part of your life. Thank you for being here. I will see you next time.